The reality of the brand needs to match to the story and the narrative that you're telling. So working with creators to talk the narrative and to make sure that the brand is always credible and shown, as its authentic self, the more important that is becoming over time.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today for this fireside chat with our lovely moderator, John Ratcliffe. But the star of the show today that we'll be having is Robbert from Unilever, who's the Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer. He's a passionate, business-driven marketer with 20 plus years of FMCG experience, mainly in marketing and sales across various different locations, including Europe and Africa. He's led a variety of business units across both established markets like Germany as well as emerging markets in Nigeria, and we're really excited to have him and talk through his career today. The discussions will be moderated by, as I mentioned, John, who's the CEO and founder of Engage Video Group. He's been in a relationship with London Business School for 10 plus years now and has guest lectured as well as organized these lecture series since 2009, like these fireside chats. We're so excited to have you guys here today, and thank you so much for facilitating this, John, and I'll let you take it away.
Well, Claire, thank you so much for those amazing introductions. And Robert, thank you so much for joining us. All super honored to have you with us today. Such a remarkable career at Unilever. I see you've spent 24 years there at one of the most timeless companies of our era, and such a remarkable journey, as Claire said, from sort of Lagos, Nigeria, I think starting in the Netherlands, spending time in Germany, multiple different markets, multiple different roles, multiple different brands over that period of time. And just such a fascinating journey. And I thought if this sounds like a good place to start, perhaps you could take us through that journey, some of the most sort of memorable parts of that journey and what brings you to where you are today.
Yeah, no, of course. Thanks, John, and thanks everybody, and really happy to be here. Look, I think there's many moments in life, both I think professional, but also on the personal side, that of course helped me to shape who I am, and I would say, and it's still shaping me, right? And that will be one of the narratives for me today, that learning never stops. So if you were thinking it will end when you're out of school or out of education, that's certainly not the case. I sometimes say with introductions, that I sound like a very boring guy, right? Working 24 years for the same company. And actually, from all of my study friends, I believe I'm the only one who is still at his first employer after university and still there. But I think I've had the benefit of, because I joined such a big global company like Unilever, I've been able to enjoy a lot of change, although my payslip has always said Unilever, but I've worked across different functions, different markets, different regions, different cultures. So I've been able to get that change within that one company, and it has also really shaped me who I am today. It is sometimes because you get put into a different challenge, whether it is moving from marketing to sales, or indeed moving to different markets where the circumstances are different, or working with different cultures, that suddenly quarters start to fall, because you're realizing what you've learned in one market, you can apply in the other market, with the finesses by itself. So I think that personal career has certainly shaped me, and the changes that I've been having there, but also on the personal side. In life, you get confronted with big changes, and some of them are really nice and positive. Like, I had 3 kids, or I have 3 kids. And I can tell you, as your kids grow up, first you learn a lot about yourself in terms of how to manage little sleep and still, be a friendly kind of person. And then once they grow up, they kind of start to mirror the behavior of yourself and your wife. So it's the best feedback tool you can imagine, because suddenly you're seeing behaviors from the little yourself being played back to you. And you're like, that's actually the little me. And, I need to take lesson out of that. But it's also things that come to you. I was 29 when I lost my mom. These kind of things also then, help you to shape, and you start to realize again what is really important in life. So if it then comes to about work-life balance, you learn indeed that, you need to take care of your family first, because we're not here to work, right? We're here to live. And work is a very important part of it. And I spend a lot of my time, much more than the 40 hours, of course, on my contract. But it needs to be fun, and it needs to serve, let's say, the life that I want to live with my family, and not the other way around, which is easier said. And sometimes you need a bit of a balanced moment to think about that. But I think, yeah, those are probably big elements that have shaped a little bit who I am today and are still shaping me in terms of what I would want to be tomorrow, you know? Make any sense, John, or?
Absolutely. Sorry, I think I got muted there. Makes so much sense, Robert. I remember when I left university, I actually applied for the Unilever internship program in Durban, and it was the hot ticket to get into. Unfortunately, I didn't crack the nod at the time. But I think if I remember the sort of like reputation of Unilever, I think always been an incredible place to learn, and at the same time, just being a great place to work. Often we're won awards like the best place to work in the world. And as I sort of reflect today with your experience within Unilever, and you spoke a bit about it there, but I wonder if there's anything which springs to mind about why you love Unilever as a company to work at.
Yeah, I think, you know, so similar to what I just shared in terms of that it offers you a wide variety of possibilities. I think the culture element is a very important part for me. And I've always experienced it as an organization where you can take a lot of charge and own accountability. Often people, you know, when they look at a job, they see it as a job description. Yeah. And I think I've always been able in the jobs that, you know, the company has asked me to do or that I applied for, you start with a job description, but you also start to then look about where do I believe, you know, I want to make a change or I can create impact with it. So it's not like you come in at 9 o'clock, you do your thing and you leave, but it's also a bit in terms of how do I believe I can create more impact? How can we grow our business better? How can we do it in a more sustainable way? And if you have a good idea, I always say that to the people I work with, nobody will stop you for a good idea. You know, you need to break it down into pieces. You need to galvanize people around you. You need to find the kind of resources, etc. Not everything is possible, but nothing is impossible, if you see what I mean. And I think that's the kind of culture that I really like. And the other part of it, I would say, is the fact that, I will admit, I didn't realize this when I started at Unilever, and we weren't probably so vocal about it, but the company is more than 100 years old, and we have come to realize that the best thing we can do for our business is also ensuring that we can still be around for another 100 years. And this is where the whole thinking around purpose and sustainability came from. Because if we want to be around for another 100 years, we need to make sure that, for instance, I'm responsible for our nutrition, our foods business. We need to make sure that we can still grow our food for the next 100 years. The sad reality is in the way how we've designed the food system today, we probably will only be able to get another 50 or 60 years of crops out of the soil because we are depleting the soil in the way how we're, you know, single-mindedly chasing certain crops and not having the right kind of biodiversity. Now, I'm an optimist. We will change this before it is too late. But that's the kind of stuff that also motivates me to come to work and to say, how do we do that? How do we make sure that the tomatoes you see behind me, and I'm in a room called Kisan, which is our Indian tomato ketchup brand. How do we make sure we grow those tomatoes in a way that we can also grow them 50 years from now, 100 years from now? And we do that by cover cropping, so putting other crops in between those tomato harvests, so that the soil gets restored and not gets depleted. And these are the elements which have, you know, always kept me close to Unilever. I have been checking in at other places, you know, when you start to get bored, but always at the right time, I was able to get a new opportunity, find a new opportunity, and refine my energy and my mojo. And I think that's a big part of it, why people, you know, appreciate working in our business today, because they have that freedom. And there is a bit more than only money. Money is important because that allows you to get scale, and sustainability loves scale. But I think it's that combination, John. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating to listen to, Robert. And as I sort of think about, you know, which organizations are meant to have impact on the world today? If an organization is to fix farming, is it government? Is government going to fix it, or is it the organizations who are creating the most tomatoes, as you say? And I think it's just so inspiring as a consumer to see big business really focusing on doing business in the right way. And it's funny you bring up the tomato example, because I follow one of your colleagues, Frank Harensnap, on LinkedIn, and he was talking about how growing tomatoes in a better way has increased the number of pollinating insects in the area by 173%. I remember that data point. And it just is so exciting to see big organizations focusing on doing things in the right way. I certainly, I lead a small company relative to Unilever, a very small company. There's 70 people in our organization, but I know that the power of purpose is so significant. And if you want people to do their best work, doing their best work for a great cause certainly feels like an important piece. And that sort of ties into this question of culture and purpose. It's felt from the outside that Unilever's always had, great culture. And I think recently the purpose piece has become a far bigger piece of the organization. Just wondered if you could talk about how that purpose has started to live within the organization, and spoke about one or two examples there. I wonder if any other spring to mind, and how powerful purpose is across the organization.
Yeah, I think, and everybody will have their own, version of this within Unilever, but I kind of discovered this when Paul Polman at the time came as a CEO to our company. And one of the things he did as his preparation for the role, because he came from the outside world, he came from Nestle at the time, and even before that at Procter & Gamble. And he started to read about the Unilever history, and he then called out this, the brand Sunlight, which was one of our founding brands at the time of the Unilever company. It's actually the lever part of the name, the soap company. And he said, at the time, Lord Lever, he brought soap to the market because he wanted to bring hygiene to population. And there was not a lot of high quality soap. There was a lot of, let's say, soap being manufactured, but not always of the right kind of quality, offering the right kind of hygienic. And he said, I want to make hygiene a commonplace and have that accessibility for everybody. And he said, if we are able to do that for all of our brands, to really link it back to what are we really trying to solve, we can be a much greater business. And he was a visionary man in a way that he really wanted to do good with the business. And he kind of allowed us to rediscover that. And I think that motivated a lot of people in our company. I would say a lot of people were skeptical also, saying, is this really going to help us to drive business? Because you can't stick a purpose onto something, but you need to think about it. Okay, how does this really fit into some of the problems the world is facing, and how can we do that? And again, if you then bring it back to the business that I'm now working on in foods, a third of the world's greenhouse gases is actually coming from our food system, which is kind of sad, because you could say, okay, yeah, we need to fly less, and maybe we should use more public transport rather than cars, etc. But everybody will say, yeah, we need to eat. Yeah, so if that's already the third of the world's greenhouse gases, we can't just say, oh, food is fine because we need to eat. So we also need to look within our own business. How do we then make sure that people can eat what they like? Taste is important, but also in a way that we grow that food and that we produce that food in the most sustainable way possible. And that's when you then start to look at these kind of things and say, okay, so the way how we grow our tomatoes is having an impact on how we do that. And that then leads to these kind of initiatives. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, we have thousands of ingredients and we can't change them all, but we've started at, some of the biggest crops we have, and we're amongst the top 3 of, users of tomatoes because of that massive ketchup business that we have, and pasta sauces, etc., you name it. And that's then where you start to then unpeel and kind of say, okay, how do we then do that? And you have to work together. So it would be too easy for businesses to say, yeah, but governments need to put the laws in place and then we'll be compliant. We need to do our bit. We then need to work with farmers who grow it, but it needs to make sure that farmers are enabled to do it, because farmers also struggle in many parts of the world to really come by well. So we need to help them with the right kind of investments, because when you make these shifts to these new agricultural practices, it's not a success from day one. It often requires a bit of investment. So as a company, we then need to commit to certain volumes to say, look, we're going to be in this for the long run, so that you're able to, to make sure that we're getting the return out of those investments. Those are heavy stuff, but it's also the motivating stuff, and that we try to drive. Yeah. We don't always tell this in the marketing world towards consumers, because for consumers, the most important thing is taste. So I need to do everything that I do with regards to, is it delivering on the taste? and then we further unpeel the onion, so to say. Yeah.
That's great to hear, Robert. Interestingly, we had Paul Polman in the speaker series a number of years ago, and he spoke a lot about what you're speaking about there. And maybe Alex, you can share it on the chat for anyone who wants to watch that speech afterwards. But it's just fascinating, and I think what a great legacy to leave, that this is all alive and healthy in the organization. And I know he's gone on to do this in other organizations too, as a sort of an advocate for good business. You spoke a bit about the intersection there of marketing and purpose, and those two things, maybe 20 years ago, didn't have a lot of intersection. As I think about marketing as one of the core levers for growth, and of course your core focus, nutrition being a really big business. I had a look at Unilever sort of balance sheets, and it's, this last year, I think I'm right in saying $13.9 billion or euros of revenue, really a massive standalone business, and that's the organization you obviously lead from a marketing point of view. Just fascinated to understand your point of view on the role of marketing in the growth of the nutrition business. And perhaps we can talk about some of the great levers in that space as well.
Yeah. Look, the function or the skill set of marketing has changed enormously, right, over the last, let's say, 10 years. Also because the world has changed dramatically and is continuing to change. So, where in the past, people, the majority of our consumers, we could reach just by putting out a linear television ad, and we would be able to, to come into every household and to tell our most fantastic story about our food brands. Today, you see that, with the digitized world, the internet, social media, it's becoming more and more fragmented space, and consumers are much more, consumer shoppers are much more teased by different kind of messages, are even able to say, block my ads, don't show me this kind of stuff. So that's become, that has really put the marketing function to change itself and to look at it. And in Unilever, we've invested, and we're investing a lot to be ready for that new future of marketing, as we say. Yeah, consumer landscape is changing. The way people shop is changing from more and more online. And even when COVID locked us in our homes, that even became, even more radical in a way. And even business models are changing. Yeah. And great marketeers are able to spot those business model changes also. What remains is that if a marketeer is able to build a really iconic brand, you're really able to, to make sure that you're still into that consumer's heart, into that consumer's mindset, and build a business on that. And what we call that is we have this call to action with our marketeers where we say, we mean that as getting on the front line. And what do we mean with that? Placing yourself in that situation as you are a consumer yourself. So listening to consumers, visiting their homes. I go into people's kitchens here in the Netherlands, but also in Vietnam, in China, in Pakistan, you name it, to understand and to watch what they're doing, because you can ask them what they're doing. And we can also, like we have this meeting on Zoom today, I can get into Zoom into somebody's kitchen. We have those facilities, but it's still sometimes you need to see what people do, because claim behavior and real behavior are also two different things. And then what we say is, if you get real, you then also need to make sure that you're authentic. So a brand is not a marketing story and a different reality. The reality of the brand needs to match to the story and the narrative that you're telling. Then we say you need to do good with it. So indeed, what is the purpose that you're bringing? What is the greater good that you're doing? It's good that you deliver on your first primary thing, which could be taste or convenience. But that's probably by itself not enough, because many of your competitors will do the same. So can you do a little bit of good, like Dove is doing with Real Beauty, for instance, or indeed our farming initiatives that we're doing with Knorr. And then we say we need to be unmissable, so that when people are out there living their lives, they sometimes walk into the activities that you do with your brand where they're like, wow, that's amazing. I want to be part of that. So we say, get real, do good, be unmissable. That's a bit the magical recipe, as we would say it, with which we want to build long-lasting brands, right? And I think in today's reality, what you see, a lot of marketing is moving towards performance marketing. So, traditionally we had marketeers driving demand, and then we had sales teams trying to convert that demand into purchases in the stores. What you're now seeing is actually the funnel is kind of, it's one funnel, right? And it's constantly circling. So people evaluate and purchase again. And what we're now saying is, hey, so more and more marketing messages are driving that performance. You need to make sure that you have a balance. If you're only driving performance, you'll see a short-term uplift of your sales, but your brand equity will start to fade. So you need to make sure that as a good marketeer, you invest in your equity, you build iconic brands, you sometimes do something really surprisingly. And then, of course, as people are on their journey and looking for, maybe solutions, in my case, it's often a recipe, what's for dinner today, then I need to make sure that I pop up with my brand with the right solution, saying, you want to cook something in 10 minutes, something tasty your family will love? This is what you can do. Click here, put it in your shopping basket, and off you go. But you need to make sure that you put that balance out there, yeah? And ideally, you do it in a way that indeed people see the greater good behind it. Because I think more and more, and rightfully so, with all the changes the world needs, we need big brands, we need big companies to join that kind of change movement, yeah? I think that's the critical recipe. It's not easy. It changes all the time. But I think those are a bit of the challenges that we see that we want to address with the future of marketing.
It feels like that challenge of short-term versus long-term thinking has always been a challenge in marketing, and the sort of relationship between the CFO and CEO office perhaps and the marketing office, and how do we come to agreement on long-term thinking versus short-term thinking. And as sort of stock markets are governed on short-term thinking, it of course becomes harder and harder. And I think layering on top of that is the fact that digital advertising is measurable, and there is a possibility of conversion in that world. And so there's this additional pressure of proving the effectiveness of marketing. That must be a really interesting challenge. How do you find in your role that you can advocate for the power of long-term, and it might be easier in an organization like Unilever, I'm not sure, but because Unilever is such a brand-centric organization, and the power of great brands is kind of what's built the organization over time. But I'd love to understand how you sort of negotiate that in your role, and sort of ensure that the long-term voice is still loud.
Yeah, this is really the million-dollar question. I think we are indeed lucky in a company like Unilever. We are a company of brands and people in the end. Yeah, so we believe that people take care of our brands, and I'm just part of a generation that is trying to bring the brands we own today to a greater position. And you're right, we also have, let's say, people in accounting and in finance that will say, okay, but Robert, I can see what the conversion is of that ad, but what is about this big activity, and you're sponsoring Super Bowl with Hellmann's? Can you really, can you help me understand the return of that? And we try to then make these points as measurable as possible. So we look at brands in terms of brand strength, and we look at a metric called brand power, where we, based on interviews with consumers, we try to get a better read in terms of how is our brand perceived versus other brands. But this is always a bit of a story you need to tell in terms of, this is what you're investing for the future. But there is also you need to acknowledge when you're in a business that there is no long-term without a short-term delivery. So you need to make sure that you're delivering on your short-term numbers to make sure that you can invest in the long-term kind of investments that are necessary to keep such a brand active, and, to invest in R&D, for instance. It's easier said than done. This is probably the biggest challenge of my teams, honestly, John, where people are, they say, but, Robert, trust me on this one, and this will come. And then, we try to unpeel, we try to bring as much evidence as possible. And you also need to face certain things, right? So we can't suddenly bet everything for 5 years. We need to deliver today, we need to deliver the quarter, and we need to make sure that we're making the right investments for the future. And luckily, more and more data is coming available. And I think the best example is always when you then quote back to, what drives people's behaviors for themselves. Why is my CFO dressed in that shirt? Why is she driving that car? That's the power of marketing, my dear friends. Yeah, because if it would only be about rationalism, everybody would drive the same car, right? Yeah, and so you need to bring that back. But this is a big part of my day job. In all honesty and fairness, I kind of like it. Yeah, that's definitely the topic always.
Super interesting. I think a car is such a great example because no one ever buys a car because they saw a performance ad.
It's image.
It's never happened. They only ever buy a car because they've built up a love for a certain car over a long period of time, and it's such a great one. And I'm sure brands like Knorr and Hellman's are the same. You feel something about those brands, which is why you buy them.
And it's not only the feeling, because feeling gets people in. In the end, it does need to deliver, and even more on products like where I'm responsible myself with food products. I can have a great image on Hellman's. If the product tastes awful or you can't get it out of the squeeze, people will never buy me again. So I need to deliver a superior product experience, combine that with the right kind of image, and we talk about pop culture, so placing it in, the set that people are interested in see today, and creators are a big part of that, right? In the past with brands, we could dominate the narrative by using traditional channels and broadcasting our messages. And more, you're now dependent on what others say about you. So working with creators to talk the narrative and to make sure that the brand is always credible and shown, as its authentic self, the more important that is becoming over time.
Interesting, Robert. As I was listening there, I was thinking about one of the challenges I see so often is big organizations. There's so much benefit with big organizations, but the ability to move fast is one of the challenges with big organizations. And if you think about platforms like TikTok or TikTok's a great example because it has so much coverage in the world today, and yet there's still risk and uncertainty attached to a platform like TikTok for many reasons. We had the head of Meta for EMEA, the global business lead there, Lee Thomas, spoke with us last month in the speaker series, and she spoke about social video and the scale of social video, where social video today is pretty much the biggest media channel of all globally.
Yes.
It just all of a sudden creeps up and becomes this huge thing. Within an organization like Unilever, how do you manage to move at the speed which is required to adopt new technologies while there is still opportunity to have great presence at perhaps a lower cost than when things are fully saturated with advertising?
Well, I think the most important thing is training, right? So helping your teams with the right kind of tools, the right kind of learnings to understand what's going on, making certain tools available, showing how we can use them to our benefit, in the end to better serve our business. But again, it's a constant learning in that sense. So first we had the rise of social, right? And people then kind of see, oh yeah, that's where the eyeballs are navigating towards. We need to be there. Now you see that the world of AI is suddenly allowing us to become much more relevant, almost offer consumers and shoppers today a felt like personal experience, because you're able to better adapt the narrative and the message to that specific target group, and based on what and how to better place that. But it is really about helping your teams to understand the power of what is possible today, doing it in an integer way, because the danger with some of these tools is also that, like every technology, you can use it for good, you can use it for bad, and the bad might even get you a short-term benefit, but you need to understand, and this is, I think, again, the benefit of a big company like Unilever, where we're very cautious and conscious about we need to behave the best way possible, because people will always look at us, where from a startup, they can make certain mistakes in their enthusiasm. A big corporate like Unilever, we're not allowed to make mistakes. And I think that's rightly so, because we have so much scale. We need to be really careful, and we need to be the most cautious one. Sometimes that's irritating for my marketeers, because they say, but Robert, these guys are making those claims and that's also not true. That's just the way that it is, right? The big guys need to allow the small guys to sometimes navigate the way. And that's where we believe, again, in the longevity of things. But that's a fine balance to work with, I would say. And the good news is that we got a lot of people that are really excited, enthusiastic, and they also want to learn. I learn the most from the younger team members, who show what is possible again and what we should be doing. We had a big debate at the time in Unilever around TikTok, because, of course, like you said, right, there were certain things that, yes, more and more consumers to the platform, but we were also conscious in terms of, okay, but if we can't control where our ad is shown, we might be shown with the wrong kind of content. And that's not something we want to be known and famous for. So but rather than ignoring, we then work with the platform to say, how can we solve this? And can we do it in a way that we can guarantee that our content shows up, or our ads show up in the right kind of content? And until we are able to guarantee that, we are very cautious. Yeah. But those are fine lines to walk. Yeah.
That cautiousness is so interesting, because as I think about brands which come from Unilever, there's a perceived trust. The trust has been built up over 50 years for lots of the brands, and I guess that trust is so core to consumers' belief about those brands. And as I think about, you were talking about how you behave as an organization, sort of ties into values and the values of the organization. And I think values, increasingly important, that organizations are led by strong values. I'd love to hear your point of view on your own values, Unilever's values, how they intersect, or anything in that space which you think has been particularly powerful for the organization and your journey.
Yeah, I think, look, we have integrity very high. And again, I can give you an example. When I was working in Nigeria, that was a completely different kind of culture. And there's a lot, of course, people, when they talk about Nigeria, they think, oh, that's where there's corruption. Yeah. And so you go in yourself already with a bias, and you think like everybody's corrupt, which is of course not the case. But you will see certain elements, and you will be pressured in the business. And I remember at the time there was a situation, where we got a letter, and there was a change in legislation. It was very clear, okay, there was a competitor behind that. And then you need to stay strong and say, okay, but that's not how we play the game, because maybe on the short term, I could take that benefit, but at some point, it will chase us down, and it will do Unilever more damage than it will do me good at this point of time. So I need to then really stay conscious, stay the course. You then need to explain that, because you need to explain it in your own organization. Why are we behaving differently than they might have expected? You need to explain that in your larger external organization to say, why are the results maybe the way that we're seeing today? Because this is happening, and that's a bit the reality on the ground, and we need to navigate through that. We hold a very high value on inclusion, which people will say that's not really strange, right? And I think diversity has always been a very strong stronghold of Unilever. We've been balanced between males, females for a very long time, but we do realize we still have a huge task or opportunity, whichever way you want to call it, by having much more cultural diversity in our teams and in our businesses. The benefit of it being a global organization is that we have seen that, and we have seen how if we mix and we have more diverse teams, we get better results. But it's still tough, because do people want to move? There's a cost of people moving. We need to help people to understand and read those different cultures and get that coming together. And we talk much more now about equity rather than equality. And what do I mean with that? Equality is giving the same circumstances to everybody. And then we say, yeah, it's fair, right? Because everybody gets the same chance in the same circumstances. But actually, equity is about realizing that certain people need different things than other people, different circumstances, to really be able to perform. The easiest example, if you have a 2-story office building and you have a person who's disabled and can't walk the stairs, that person is never going to be able to perform like, the person who's able to walk up the stairs several times. This is a very banal kind of example, but you can also imagine if there's people, that have been raised in a certain way, which are, causing them to be much more, holding back in sharing their thoughts. You need to invite these people to then bring out their thoughts, to dare to bring that to the table and welcome that diversity of thought, and not immediately have the extroverts jump on that. And then suddenly, that opinion falls down under the radar screen again. So, and this is a lot of sensitivity. This requires a lot of listening, a lot of feedback. And I can tell you, every human being is biased. I'm biased, and I know it. And this is, for instance, why we do, now all of the job interviews we have for our leaders. It's not a one-to-one. We have panels, and we make sure that we've got different people on the panel, so that we can, and not just I have an interview and there's a separate interview in the room next door an hour later. It needs to be one and the same conversation, because then you can also say, I perceive that differently, yeah? And not like, oh, in my interview, she was much more nervous than what you now described for me. So you want to be able to relate that. This is a huge investment in time, and it offers a great kind of humbleness from people, but we really see the benefit. But this is extremely difficult, John. I can tell you, it's not easy to do, and we still have a long way to go. Yeah, in that sense. Yeah, entrepreneurship, I would say, is another cultural trait that we hold very high, and I can give you an example there. When I came to Germany, in the Netherlands, we find ourselves quite entrepreneurial, and we see an opportunity, we go for it. And the way how we do it is we try 10 things, 9 fail, but we kind of stop them early enough that they don't become painful. And the one that really works, we talk so much about it, people say, wow, that's really a hero. And when I came to Germany, I noticed that the teams really struggled with failure, because, that was the worst thing that you could do. So we needed to give people comfort in saying, it's not a bad thing if you try and you fail, as long as you learn from it and then you move on fast enough, yeah? And be a bit more flexible. So, the beautiful thing is, although we've got these big cultural values, they mean different things, and they're on different levels in different markets and with different cultures, yeah? And that's what I love, to try and see and to bring those things together, yeah? And I think it's one of the reasons why many people enjoy working at us, and it's part of our proposition, I would say. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. South Africa is a very experimental country by culture, and I have noticed working with different cultures where the idea of experimenting with potential failure is quite terrifying, and it's always been, I think, inbred in our culture that it's sort of, that's part of like working stuff out. I think it's an interesting thing, which, the way you see the world allows you to do things differently. Maybe one last question about marketing, and quite a broad one, but I would just love to hear your point of view on this. So, of course, business value is so closely connected to growth, and your organization, I think I saw, grew 8.6% in the 2022 year, which is quite remarkable. And of course, marketing, they're responsible for growth in organizations. I'd love to understand your point of view in this complex marketing world, what you feel is working from a marketing point of view. There have been so many new things which have popped up. There's so much noise, there's so much clutter, there's so much of everything. But I'd love to just understand your point of view on like what allows companies of the scale of Unilever to grow from a marketing point of view. Like, what are the reliable places you can turn to in 2023?
I think one of the big things, a big shift, I think, versus, let's say, 50 years ago, is that brands can't be everybody's friend anymore. Yeah. So, the world, unfortunately, is polarizing. Yeah. And I'm saying unfortunately also because, information is also, although we get more information every day, information also tends to become more and more colored, right? And it's difficult to filter it out. And what you see is that as a brand, you have to get involved in the conversation at some point. And you could say it's purpose. You can also, on the other hand, say it's authenticity. And you need to dare to take a stand. Otherwise, at a certain point of time, you'll be called out for it. Yeah. Now, you also need to watch out for taking a stand too often, too many times, because you also can't, I think a good brand should lead the way, but it can't also be too finger pointing or telling in a way. But take the example of Nike with Copernic. I thought that, that was a marketing campaign, but with a very clear vision, right? And it certainly alienated a lot of users, specifically in the United States at the time. Remember, for the people that don't know this case, Copernic was an American football player, a Black American football player, who kneeled down during many of the games because he was taking a protest stand against discrimination and specifically police violence at the time in the United States. And that was his way of, making a position. And of course, as you could imagine, there were two sides. There was the side of America that said, fantastic, he's taking a stand. And there was the side that was saying, it's rebellious, it's not showing respect to our country's flag, etc., etc. And I don't say you need to choose, but what I liked is that the brand took a position. And they said, we are ready to take a position for what we believe is good. And they are willing to take the consequences out of that. And I think that's a very strong thing to do. Now, you can't do that one day you choose one side, one day you choose the other side. You will be, and rightfully so, you will be squashed for it. Yeah. But I think real brands are daring to take important stands on topics that lie relatively close to them. And of course, as they were a massive sponsor into American football, and they had that they had to take a stand at some point, right? And I think so I think that's a big lesson where, as a brand, at some point of time, you need to dare to take a stand, and you need to, to live the consequences for it. But you also need to make sure that you're consistent with it and it's aligned to your brand values, in a way. Yeah. I think that's a big one. Yeah.
That must have been a scary time for the Nike head of marketing there, because it's such a brave move. I remember at the time looking and seeing that the US sales were kind of flat, but outside of the US, the global world was just so supportive of what Nike was standing for. And so there was uncertainty. Maybe there was some people were buying less Nike, some were buying more in the US, but in the rest of the world, everyone was just like, wow, this feels like such a great thing.
And you remember their stock price, first when they did that, their stock price went down because, there were investors that said, oh my goodness, this is so wrong, and you're taking a choice in political field. And then afterwards, indeed, like you said, sales in certain parts, really, because as people say, okay, that's it, Nike, I'm burning all my shoes, I'm never buying you again. And that, led to investor anxiety. And then other parts, you see that then other consumer groups then stand up and say, hey, I'm even buying more of you now, or I'm now going to convert to Nike because you're taking a stand. And I think, and again, it should not be a marketing move, because that's then a short-term gain, and it will be a very quick point when you will be called out for the reality. But I think in this world where we've got still so many things we need to tackle, we need brands like this to take stands to navigate us through the right direction, right? And every consumer makes their own choice. But I think there is a responsibility for big brands. And I think if you want to be iconic, you need to dare to take stands on certain topics. Yeah. One of the positions I like from Unilever is with Dove, probably less radical, but still very confrontational in the beauty world, right? Where Dove was talking about real beauty. And again, in social media, there is so much. Think about the bold glamour filter. Even I've got two girls, two of my three kids are girls, and you can kind of see how they look at beauty and the imagery they are fed. And then I'm like, I kind of like the work that then Dove is doing and saying, well, it's about real beauty and showing the beauty, whether it's freckles, whether it's in disabilities. I mean, they've been so consistent with that campaign over time. And I think the credibility also then comes from not just making a very impactful ad, but, going into schools, having a Dove self-esteem fund that allows to fund those schools to get, learning materials, to help girls in trouble, to get counseling. And these are things I think that we need more of. Yeah. And I believe, honestly, that will differentiate a good brand to a great brand, and to, real loyalty. And maybe less people buying, but those people really buying more and being extremely loyal. And I think that's very valuable. Yeah.
Oh, I love that, Robert. So many interesting things you touched on there. And I think one of them being consistency. And I think one of the things about Dove, my very first job was at Ogilvy, and I remember reading, David Ogilvy coming up with the, Dove is not a soap. But one of the things which just strikes me when I think about Dove is how little change there's been over the long term. And I think another brave move, almost as brave as the move in the Kaepernick case, is just changing nothing within a brand from when I say changing nothing, I mean retaining the consistency at the base of what the brand has always stood for. Because I think as I look at marketing, there's always this urge to do different things. And I think just looking at that Dove example, just that consistency over, I don't know how long the brand's been around for, but it feels like 70, 80 years. I'm not sure. But yeah, consistency feels like such a great one.
Yeah. And I can't stress enough. And again, the more, certain products are more bought for image, and other products are also bought for image, but there you do require a certain level of performance, right? And for instance, so true to that point of Dove, there has always been a quarter of hydrating cream in every Dove product. Why? Because if you have a hydration on your skin will look more beautiful, more hydrated, will give it shine, it will take away the skin shivers and stuff like that. So, and you have to be very true to that, because of course, the people in R&D and the supply chain will say, we can save money if we don't make it a quarter, but we make it 15% and it will still work. But then you're kind of taking the magic out of your product, and it will not be noticed from today to tomorrow. But in 2 years' time, suddenly people say, it's not doing what I was expecting from it anymore. And then they're open to look for it again. So image is important. Performance is crucial. And even more if you're in a fast-moving consumer goods business like I am, every single product needs to deliver. Yeah. Image gets me off the shelf. Performance gets me in the repeat. Yeah. I think that's very important to acknowledge. Yeah. And then if I'm then able to show consumers that we're trying to take a position on the world which they can relate to, do things a little bit better, whether it's for their own health, for the health of the planet, these are the kind of things that then give us our license to operate, and hopefully allow us to be in business for another 100 years.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, Robert. As we jump to the last couple of questions, I just wanted to say, if anyone wants to pop a question in the chat or put their hand up and ask Robert directly, you'd be super welcome to. Yeah, there are a couple of things we haven't touched on, and we're sort of running out of time, but perhaps one which feels like something you'd have a point of view on. I guess over 24 years at Unilever, and having led a lot of teams over that time, the power of a great team, the power of great people who you can work with, I have to assume that's right up at the top of the list of important things to get right in your role. I'd love to understand your view on, first of all, attracting the best people to your teams and then keeping them there.
Yeah, excellent question. As I started as a management trainee at the time, and then you as you make your career, you come to a certain point where you're like, it's not about being the smartest in the room anymore. It's not possible, right? Because there are so many smart people around you. So it becomes more and more important that you're able to bring the best out of people. Yeah. And leadership becomes about finding the best people, making the best people able to work together. And I discovered about myself where do I get the most energy from, is helping people to make changes that for some reason they know they want to do, or they think it's right for the business. Sometimes it's business development, sometimes it's personal development, but something is holding them back. Yeah. And I've always noticed that I've never come to a team where I was like, oh my God, you guys have no idea what you're doing. You know what you need to be doing is this, just execute it, and 5 months later we'll be fine. They know what needs to be done. But there's certain things why it hasn't worked. Yeah. And then it's about trying to tackle those constraints together, giving people the ability to take a risk, that they feel that they're supported if they would fail, because it's part of the greater team. And, we're betting on several irons, so one of them will come out. That's where I get a lot of my joy. So I would say there is no magical recipe to leadership. First and foremost, leadership needs to be authentic. You need to understand yourself. I think what always happens to me is you need to realize, why would anyone want to be led by you? Yeah. If they feel that you're only there to make your own career, why would they support you? They need to feel that you also want to help them develop, right? And you want to help them to be successful. And that you dare to take difficult positions and support them also when the going gets tough. That's where I get my energy from. Yeah. And you should not ask me to lead a business to just take care of it. I like to drive change. But there are also businesses where we say we just need perfect execution, right? So you need to understand your own style, and you need to think about, why would these people want to work for you? Yeah. And I'm a big fan in that sense of, really understanding what's motivating people, what's holding them back, and how can you help to develop and to do that. And sometimes there's tough decisions. Yeah. Leadership is not always easy. It's choosing between different people. And again, you should challenge yourself and, use others and dare to use others, because sometimes there's a tendency. I made the mistake also when I was young. I started to recruit people like me because I knew how they work. It was the similar kind of energy. But then at a certain point of time, when you have a team of only little Roberts, you kind of see that we're struggling, guys, because we're missing certain qualities where I'm really poor at. So I need to find that right kind of, I need to understand what does this team need and what are the profiles. And it might be completely different profiles than me. And then I also need to dare to shut up and let their people do their job and help them. So it's these kind of things where, and sometimes you have to say to people, you know, you're not in the right kind of role. We need to find a different role where you can further develop. And what I've learned is that goes the longest. So I've had people that thank me for the promotion we gave them. I've had people that thank me for the honest conversations we've had, which were tough. And it was not happy moments at the time. But at a certain point of time, people then realize this is better for me now. Yeah. But those are tough moments sometimes. Yeah. My lesson is to always stay as close to yourself as possible, know where your strengths and weaknesses lie, and dare to ask support and you know, dare to challenge yourself. Yeah. But yeah, I'm still learning there also. Yeah.
There's so much good stuff in there, Robert. One of the things you spoke about there was, you know, getting the information out of your team. They know the changes which need to be made. And it reminds me of a point Dee Thomas made last month where she said, you know, if you ask a room of people within an organization, do you know something which could make the company better, which you could tell the CEO, and if you did tell them would make the company better, but you have not told them, and creating the environment where people do speak, where they do speak up, and they know that there is no fear that they will be sort of, you know, persecuted for speaking up. And it really reminds me of what you're saying there. It just feels like such a powerful atmosphere to create and culture to create within your team.
Yeah. And we do, for instance, you know, and I was just speaking to my HR business partner earlier today. We have a thing which we call Univoice. So Uni from Unilever and voice from, because it sounds all nice, right? You speak to people and the people share. Not everybody shares, yeah? And they will, if they don't like me and they think that I'm not behaving in the right way, are they gonna really tell me? And are they gonna tell my boss if they know my boss really likes me? Probably not. So you need to then also dare to say, okay, fill it in anonymously. Let us tell us what is going on, what is there, yeah? And you will also see, you will never get 100% perfect score, yeah? So there will always be, and if businesses are, I've seen it myself, if businesses are under performance stress, teams feel more pressured. And that's when the tough really gets going, yeah? It's easy to have a great culture in a winning team. It's much more important, however, to get a great culture in a losing team, because that's what you need to make the difference. But that's really difficult. So you also then need to use those kind of tools and mechanisms to get the reality up, yeah? Because there will always be a certain amount of held back. There will always be a certain amount of bias, yeah? So I think those are some of the challenges, yeah?
Such a great point, Robert. And as I hear that, I just feel like maybe we could be better at that as a company and surfacing these things. And I think it's requires, you know, that vulnerability from leadership. It requires sort of the openness from leadership. And I think that's such a powerful point there. We've got a question here from Rawani, just talking about how important diet is and the role big business plays in the foods we all eat. And I know this is something really to ignore with the Future 50 and that kind of thing. I wondered your point of view on the role of big business in terms of the diet of the world at scale.
Yeah, no, look, I think we have a huge responsibility there. And this is where I said that we can't always hide behind what others do. We need to dare to take a position, also because we're one of the bigger players in that light. We believe the food system is broken. Just imagine about it, right? We have 800 million people going to bed hungry every day. The funny thing is, we've got over 3 billion people obese, yeah? Holy shit, yeah? So it's not that we don't have enough food, it's unequally spread. We also have, you know, food's not always in the best healthy spaces, etc. Now, you could say, yeah, that's for governments to solve. No, we also as a company need to take a stand there. We need, in a system, you need to work together. And as a big player in that system, we need to dare to lead the way, yeah? Sometimes I do say to my team, because I can make a bouillon cube without salt, yeah, which is a lot better because many of the people in the globe are eating too much salt. But if I have a bouillon cube without salt, which doesn't taste versus the competitive anymore, I'm doing the right thing for nobody, yeah, because nobody will buy me. So sometimes it's better to then say, how do I make sure that, so I challenge my teams. I always want to be the healthier solution. I might not always be the healthy solution, but I want to be the healthier solution. My ketchup contains the least sugar of them all. My bouillon contains the least salt of them all. And if we can't make that, that's what R&D needs to work on. But it needs to taste really good, because otherwise nobody's going to buy me. And the impact of the good is going to be zero. So you need to take these kind of stances, and you need to dare to work together in the industry with the partners. It's the same thing. Recyclability of packaging. I can say to the Indonesian government, you guys need to better organize your waste collection. But if I don't make my packaging in a way that it can be recycled, it's a bit chicken and egg. So we need to get our act together and make all our packaging recyclable, so that we can then say to the Indonesian government, guys, there's money there. And if you guys can collect that, we can recycle it. And by the way, we will be willing to buy that from you again to put into our own packs, so that we can then get that system change going. So I always say we need to understand what are the constraints in the system and how can we contribute to that. And there are way too many constraints. We can't do everything. We're far, far, far from perfect. But there's always stuff on our agenda where we say, if we put our minds to it and we put our effort to it, we can get there. And we set very straight commitments, whether it's in terms of the nutritional intake, whether it's about the level of baddies, the level of goodies, the recyclability of our packs, the way how we grow our materials. And you need to then talk about it and ideally find stakeholders that are willing to support you on that route. Yeah, but it's a fine balance, because you can do all the right things, but if you are too expensive, nobody's going to buy you. So you need to find that balance in having a compelling consumer proposition and doing good at the same time. That's the sweet spot. Yeah.
It is very inspiring to hear, Robbert, because I think if I think back sort of 30 years ago, I don't think that, I mean, I could be wrong, but that the large organizations were thinking about this balance with the consideration around doing good for the planet, doing good for the as much good for the planet and the consumer. So it's incredibly inspiring to hear the big companies making a shift in this direction. Yeah. Just two last things. Have we got your time until the half hour, Robbert? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay for me. Yeah.
So the last two things I wanted to chat about, over the long term, I think, regardless of what you're trying to do, balance is really important. We can't be, doing a 100-meter sprint every day. It has to feel like a marathon, something where you're looking for sustainability in your own performance. How have you managed balance, sort of leading a family, looking to achieve significantly at work? How have you managed to pull all of these things together?
Yeah, I think my boss actually, she has a great phrase on this, and I think I really like that insight. And she says, because she often gets the question, because she's a very senior female leader. She's in the board of Unilever, and they also and she's a mom. She has kids. Great career. Everything. And she says, and people often ask her, how do you do that? And I like how she says, you can never do everything perfect at the same time. Mm-hmm. So balance is not about having balance every hour of the day, every day. It's about over that time finding those balances. So there will be moments that you need to be there for the family, and that will be a moment that you will not be perfect for the company, yeah, or you will not be, if you're the perfect spouse, you might not be perfect for your career, you might not be perfect for your kids. If you're perfect for the kids, and you need to find that balance, and that's easier said than done. But already that acknowledgement that you can't keep all the balls in the air all of the time, and that you need to face that, I think is a very important insight. What I've always used myself is that you need to be able to stay very close to your energy. So I'm a high energy kind of guy, and I really look for, how do I make sure I have enough elements of energy in my day to also be able to take the energy drainers in the day. I've noticed that sports is very important for me. So despite the amount of work that I have and that I want to be home for the family, I go to sports 3 times a week. I've noticed that I need that, and I do 2 times a week, 45 minutes of high intensity training, where I have the benefit of a good job, so I can pay somebody who kicks my ass. And I've noticed if I don't do that, I don't go. So I need to have the guy or girl waiting for me, so that I don't have this, I'll send an email and I'll go tomorrow. No, I need to go there, because otherwise the person is there waiting for me. And on weekends, I go for a long cycle ride. And I need those kind of investments, and then I'm much more effective afterwards. So I've had the time where I was working the whole night, and it takes you hours to do the email. If I go to 45-minute sports, I can do the email, in 15 minutes later. I got a clear mind. I've lost my energy. And it's understanding for you what works, and then acknowledging you can't be perfect all the time, and then trying to face that according to what life throws at you and what your career demands. And there is always moments in your jobs you can take it a bit easier, and that's when you need to reinvest time in other places. And there's moments when your family needs you, then you need to be there for your family. Because otherwise, problems get worse. Very rarely a problem solves itself. So you need to tackle it before it becomes even more time consuming. But again, it's very smart. I can tell you, and my wife will also tell you, I'm not perfect at it. So I also want to be fair in that sense. But I think overall I'm doing okay at the moment.
Fantastic, Robert. Robert, last question. So hypothetically, imagine you are starting your career again tomorrow and you've just graduated. What do you think you would do? What's the advice you would give for new students, graduating students, how to get started in their career, what sort of space you would get started in, what sort of would be the best career path for you to start on there?
I think, and I think the younger generations are already a lot better, but really invest in knowing yourself. I grew up when there was a very clear image on what success was looking like, and it was having your own house, being married, having kids, having a great career and all that kind of stuff. But really understanding what is important for you, and don't deviate too far from that, because that's what will drive your inner energy. I would say be open. You always need to be open to learn. The world changes, things happen in life. Dare to listen to that. Be humble and kind. Why do people want to work with you? Why do they want to work for you? Why do they want to help you out? It's one of those open doors. Treat people like you want to be treated. But I think that's also something to always remember about it. And when you're looking at opportunities that come your way, I always, so I've not always said yes to every role. I've not always said no to every role. What I always look for and advise my people when they ask for career advice, I said, you need to jump onto opportunities which feel great from the heart, and a bit of worry, in the mind or in the stomach, because that feels like the right kind of development opportunity. Because it needs to be feeling good in the heart because you're energized. You're like, this is what I want. That's the kind of stuff that allows you to work 12 hours of work, maybe in 8. But it also needs to feel a little bit scary, because that's where the development opportunity lies. That's where the unknown lies, where you will grow with, and which will shape you further. I think those would be my words of advice. Be open, be humble, and don't take yourself too seriously. I always say, I'm not a heart surgeon. I sell bouillon, I sell mayonnaise. I try to have impact with it, but if I have a bad day, it's not the end of the world. So take your business serious. Don't take yourself too serious.
Fantastic, Robert. Robert, thank you so much for your time. I found this conversation thought-provoking, super interesting. I feel to have learned a huge amount from you, from a marketing, from a leadership point of view, from a team's point of view, culture, so many great things, which I think are the cornerstones of great organizations. So just a huge high five and a huge thank you from everyone from the London Business School and a few other universities who've dialed in, and just a huge thank you for your time. Thanks a lot, John. It was really a pleasure to be here. And questions like these also help me to order my thoughts, right? And there's things that then I say, that's where I still have some jobs to be done. So thanks for that. And I wish you all the best of luck. And if you're interested, we're always open for good people. To all your students out there.
Excellent. Thank you again so much. I echo everything that John said, and we really appreciate your time and all of your insights today, Robert.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. Have a good further day.